There's a running gag among members of my family that states that I am more American than I am Colombian. Now, it's a tease, of course, but it stems from some measure of reality. Ever since I was a little kid, the cultures of English-speaking countries have had a big pull on me, and nowhere is this more apparent than in my usage of language. Allow me to illustrate. When I was a little kid, from the very first time I spoke, I had trouble pronouncing the R appropriately in Spanish. It was very tricky for me, because the letter required that I put the tip of my tongue on my palate, and I somehow vibrate my tongue to make the distinctive R sound, and I couldn't do it for the longest time. My issue with its pronunciation was so bad, in fact, that one teacher at a preschool even thought I suffered from retardation. I remember my father went crazy mad at her when she suggested that, and I don't blame him, honestly. But I digress. The funny thing about this whole affair was that, for some unknown reason, my pronunciation of the R closely resembled the letter's pronunciation in English, and this turned out to be a big deal. When I finally started learning English at the age of 6, I had an almost natural knack for the language, and its usage came with relative ease to me. As I kept on growing, I learned English so quickly that I soon found myself knowing about as much of the English language as I knew about Spanish, and that's pretty ridiculous once you take into account the fact that Spanish is the sole language in my country. Simultaneously, after some speech therapy, I did eventually learn how to spell the R in Spanish appropriately, but by then, English had caught up, and that fact quickly manifested itself in how I did things. For example, I listened to the Beatles and the Police instead of Shakira and Carlos Vives, which are, by the way, Colombian, in case you didn't know that. Or I watched movies in English rather than Spanish, despite my siblings' protest. Or I even occasionally wrote the date on a paper in English without even realizing it. Now, these sort of examples may seem kind of meaningless, but they hide underneath them the curious dynamic with which I use and still use language to this day. Since I basically learned 2 languages simultaneously, and they were my very first languages, I had nothing else to fall back on, I grew to develop a very binary use of words and expressions. It's for reasons like these that my family teases me with being, quote-unquote, more American than Colombian. But I wear that tease like a badge of honor. The only reason I was so influenced by those outside cultures was because of my own strive for improving the ability I had with the 2 languages of my childhood, and this is something I'm quite proud of. I'm even more proud of this now, in fact, given that my early introduction to the English language undoubtedly played a large role in getting me admitted into this fantastic university. Thank you.
Created using Powtoon.